Hey BookTube friends, it's Carrie. Thanks for joining me today. I wanted to do a reading update. I didn't want to call this a weekly wrap up since I did miss last week's. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I went to the beach for a few days, enjoyed some relaxation and some reading. So that's why I've been kind of MIA. But the first book I want to talk about is City of Thieves by David Benioff. And this is one of the books that was recommended to me by my subscribers after I reviewed a nonfiction young adult book about Dmitri Shostakovich and the creation of the Seventh Symphony during the Siege of Leningrad. This book here is a historical fiction book set in 1942 during the siege, and we follow two very likable characters. One is Lev. He's 15 years old. He's caught looting by the NKVD, and the other is Kolya, who's a little bit older, more experienced, and he is captured for being a deserter. These two unlikely friends find themselves together in a prison. They assume they're going to be executed, but a colonel who is feeling quite generous offers them the option of finding 12 fresh eggs for his daughter's wedding in exchange for their freedom. And of course, the premise to this whole scenario is kind of crazy and ridiculous in the midst of this siege, where the citizens of Leningrad haven't been able to receive fresh food. They've resorted to eating, glue from the binding of library books and cannibalism and all sorts of horrible things. So the premise is kind of interesting, but it does throw these two characters into a lot of different scenarios where they come across some interesting characters. We do see a lot of the realities of war in the siege of Leningrad. There is a very disturbing scene that deals with anti-tank dogs being used by Soviet troops, and if you are an animal lover, that one's kind of rough. So even though this book does provide a good bit of humor and the characters are kind of comical, it really doesn't diminish the very gritty, realistic portrayal of what it was like to survive in Russia during World War II. So I really appreciated that, and this is probably one of the better historical fiction books that I've read in a while. Really enjoyed it, and I liked the characters, and it is a good kind of coming of age story for our character Lev. The next two books that I want to talk about were audiobooks I listened to. They're by the same author. Stories I Only Tell My Friends and Love Life by Rob Lowe. And I know I talked about Rob Lowe in my mid-year freakout tag because I used him as the answer to my fictional crush. I just really admire Rob Lowe because I think he's a very versatile, underrated actor, and I do feel like he is a Hollywood success story who has overcome addiction, and he's had a long-standing sobriety and also a long-lasting marriage. And in these two books, we get a good peek at his life as a sober actor and a devoted father and husband. And you also get the details of some of his wilder days. And I will say, of the two books, I probably enjoyed Stories I Only Tell My Friends a little bit more. And it's not that the second book wasn't good, because I absolutely enjoyed them both. But I did feel like, because of my interest in some of the other actors he talked about, and particularly with the creation of The Outsiders, that first book gave me a lot more stories and a lot more details about that. So if you're interested in, Tom Cruise or Emilio Estevez or Charlie Sheen or any of these other kind of who's who of that group from the 1980s, this is a great book to read because you really get some inside stories. And because the books were narrated by Rob Lowe himself, it really felt like he was just having a conversation with me, and we were friends, and he was telling me some stories, just kind of regaling me with these tales. Both books really highlight how much timing and luck factors into having a successful acting career in Hollywood, and I found that part very interesting. The second book really goes into a lot of the nitty-gritty of what it takes to make a film and what it takes to produce a television show, because Rob Lowe has also written and produced some things as well. So That was very interesting. If you are into Star Wars, there's a pretty neat story about that as well, and I won't tell everything because I think you should read these books. A lot of the people that are mentioned in these books you would think have no connection to Rob Lowe, and you wouldn't assume he met or even knew in any capacity. But for example, he had a chance encounter with John Belushi when he was a young child as well. Rob and his brother Chad had been to Dodger Stadium for a game. They were being hassled by some bullies, and this adult stepped in and kind of rescued them, and he invited them to a show that he was doing. He was actually one of the puppeteers for the Muppet Show, and I believe this was when Kermit the Frog was maybe hosting the Tonight Show, and so he invited Rob and his brother to the Tonight Show, and at the after party, John Belushi was there. He said, "Hey kid, what are you doing here?" to Rob Lowe, and Rob said, "I was invited," and John Belushi asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, and Rob told him he wanted to be an actor just like him. And according to Rob Lowe's memory, John Belushi got a very kind of serious look on his face and whispered in his ear, "Stay out of the clubs, kid." And I thought that was very foreboding considering what happens to John Belushi and also what happens to Rob Lowe. We know that in this book it also talks about his struggles with alcohol addiction, and he doesn't really hold anything back in these two books, and it really confirmed a lot of the things that I already felt about Rob Lowe, some of my preconceived notions about him being just a very genuine, down-to-earth person, and I definitely got that vibe from these two books, so highly recommend. The next book I want to talk about is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, and this book is not something I would typically read, but it is one of Lady Jane Books' favorites, so I thought I would give it a go. Jane has assured me that the series actually gets better after the first book, so I will probably continue it, even though there were some things about this first one that I didn't particularly like. It was enjoyable. I did enjoy one character in particular that I'll get to, but this to me felt like a very classic enemies to lovers story. Kind of felt like a Beauty and the Beast retelling because our main character, Feyre, is the human who's thrown into the midst of this magical world where her captor is a fairy who can take the form of a beast. And when he's in his human form, he is kind of masked by this bejeweled masquerade mask, which is some sort of curse on his people. We have a very dangerous world that Feyre is thrown into, and she's trying to decipher what is, true from the legends she's heard about fairies, and she talks often about how dangerous they are, and we hear stories about how they have ripped people to shreds, and yet she makes very frustrating decisions. I feel like she tries to convince us of the danger that's present in this magical world, but then she completely ignores that danger and proceeds to make decisions that are just illogical, but they do advance the plot. So there you go. The evil character in this book, I don't want to give anything away if you haven't read it, but the evil character in this book, one of the ways that Feyre can kind of save the day is by solving this riddle. And when she gives the riddle, I knew the answer immediately. And so it was very frustrating to think that Feyre didn't get it. So that was very frustrating. But there was one character that I enjoyed, and that was Rhys. He is part of the Fairy Night Kingdom, and he is the morally gray bad boy. He definitely has a little bit more of an appeal to me. So even though the love story will be with our main character Feyre and her captor Tamlin, I enjoyed Rhys and his character a lot more because he seemed to have a long-term plan, an agenda, and the things that he did made sense to me. I hope in the sequels I'll see more of him. The last book that I want to talk about was a nonfiction book called All Hands Down, The True Story of the Soviet Attack on the USS Scorpion by Kenneth, Sewell, and Jerome Preisler. And this deals with the very mysterious sinking of the USS Scorpion in May of 1968. All 99 hands who were on board this U.S. submarine are lost at sea. And this is very mysterious, but in this nonfiction book, a lot of dots are connected. We see that this isn't an isolated incident, and that there were attacks and encounters between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 6 months leading up to this event. In January, there was a U.S. intelligence ship called the Pueblo, who was actually seized by the North Koreans, and the North Koreans do seize some cryptography equipment during this time. This is also when we have John Walker, who is the infamous traitor who is supplying the KGB with lots of naval intelligence. And in March of the same year, the Soviet submarine K-129 sank near Hawaii under mysterious circumstances. And in this book, there are a lot of resources that are used, a lot of declassified documents that are incorporated to make these connections. And the argument is made that the Soviets believed K-129 was the victim of an attack, and that the sinking of the USS Scorpion was retaliation for that. And the book also goes into the motivations of both governments to keep information about what happened to the USS Scorpion secret, and how that definitely prevented some sort of nuclear war and mutually assured destruction and all of those sorts of things. I will probably read some more submarine books, particularly World War II U-boat books. We have a lot of those. So you'll probably see more of that in the future. I hope everyone is having a great day. I hope you're staying cool. It is super hot here, so I'm probably going to find something good to read and stay in the air conditioning. If you've read any of these books and you have any thoughts, please shoot me a comment, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching, guys.